Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and we have finally made it to the movies we wanted to talk about the most, I would probably say, or certainly one of the most in this month. As you can see above, Christopher Nolan month, the month of August, we are going to be talking about all of Christopher Nolan's movies in the lead up to his recent film, Tenet. We're going to have you just completely covered for Christopher Nolan content, and we have finally made it at his 2005 first soiree into superhero films, Batman Begins. We are beginning the trilogy right here today. I think this one's probably going to be a longer review compared to some of our other ones. Not to say by any stretch of the imagination that our previous reviews have been short. They probably clocked it around half hour to 40 minutes. I think we're going to be up there with this one today, but this is one that we probably actually haven't talked about all that much on the channel, in the channel's history. We talked about Dark Knight last year when we went to the 10-year anniversary. I think we've probably talked bits and pieces here with Dark Knight Rises, maybe. And I know we greatly differ on that. We'll get to our review later on for that one. But Begins, we haven't really talked about. These earlier Christopher Nolan films have been like uncharted territory for us on Cinema Savvy.
Yeah, it's strange because this is probably one of the most... I'm not going to say this is a low-key Nolan film because this isn't, but this is very much still in the pre-Dark Knight era, I guess we can say. Mm-hmm. And I think the only time it's probably come up is maybe like a general chit-chat or if it's been in Battle of the Brackets. But we've not actually had the time set aside to go over this film, which is quite fascinating because off camera, me and you've spoken about this a lot over the years as well. So we all have our opinions on this. It's not a Dark Knight Rises, but not split, which is nice. But yeah, it's kind of quite crazy actually, where this is, arguably jumping in one of the greatest comic films ever made. And we never really get to talk about it. And to even like neutral people, not many people talk about this one either. All the attention goes to Dark Knight and then Rises, especially with the sort of modern Batman films. And obviously we'll delve into that across this because I think there are reasons why this didn't reach the levels it did, which I'll talk about a bit. Yeah. Brackets, same month of Star Wars 3. I think that's something I was going to remember. But yeah, this is a bit of a strange way to jump in. So, as usual, with Nolan Month, I'm just going to quickly say, if you haven't seen our previous reviews, we do now have reviews out on the channel for Following, Memento, and Insomnia. Thank you for those that have tuned in with those. We've seen the numbers bounce up. It's really good. I was new to 2 of the 3 films. They were very nice discussions. Again, things we hadn't spoken about. I'm going to quickly jump in with the usual sort of stuff. So don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Like I said, all things Christopher for August, we have you covered. Obviously, very fortunate in the UK that we get to see 10 on the 26th of August. So we will, in theory, have the review up before many other places, which we're not going to brag about too much. And you're going to find us on social medias to get updated when we're going live these videos. We're on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, at Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and on Instagram at Cinema_Savvy. And for those of you that want to pick up a nice t-shirt, we have TeePublic, link in the description below. We have 2 stars. We've got our original logo, and as we can tell by the pointing downwards, the Copy Cinema Savvy logo. So there's a quick buzz for you Nolan fans out there that want to wear something different.
I'm going to get used to that logo now. Now we've got that, you kind of want that to be the norm, but I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts for Nolan month. So I don't know about you, but like with the other ones, I mean, we want to do like as good reviews as we possibly can. We want to do all these films justice, but there seems like there's a kind of pressure with these ones to get the best review we possibly can for these movies because of the caliber that they are. But Batman Begins, as you mentioned, yeah, it is. I'd say out of the 3, it's probably, I don't even want to say the lesser known, but the less popular, I'll say, out of the 3, which is amazing when you consider that this movie has kickstarted one of the most successful and most lucrative film trilogies in cinema history, which is amazing. So this was done on a budget of 150 mil. It made 379 mil. This is according to Wikipedia figures right here. And there are a number of reasons, as you mentioned, as to why it perhaps didn't hit those heights. But before we get to this, with Christopher Nolan taking the reins of the Batman franchise alongside David S. Goyer, we need to talk about a lot of the failed Batman film attempts. So obviously we need to cast our mind back to the last theatrical Batman movie that was released preceding Batman Begins, which was Batman and Robin, which we did a watch along to. It's a very entertaining movie, but a very, very incredibly different Batman movie, and wasn't particularly well received. Often regarded as one of the worst comic book movies ever made. But that's a different discussion. Go watch that video if you want to watch our discussion on that. This left Warner Brothers in a very complicated state in that there was, I'm trying to do the math now, was there an 8-year gap, I believe, between film versions of Batman and Robin and Batman Begins, I think?
I can't remember what year Batman and Robin. If it's 8 years, if it came out in 97.
I think it was 97. Yeah.
97. So there's the gap. And, even in, I was one, so I'm not going to sit here and say I knew the build up, but in modern day, 8 years ago, we had the Dark Knight Rises come out. We've had Batfleck, we've had Justice League, and now we've got Rob Pattinson. 8 years, 3 different Batmen. We've had Gotham. We've had obviously the Arkham game. Don't know if that really counts, but Batwoman. There's been a lot of Batman content over the last 8 years. Whereas,
and not just in terms of Batman as well. You think about superheroes getting rebooted was a massive thing, and like the biggest one that like hit me in terms of the time limit. You had Spider-Man. Spider-Man 3, very fresh in people's minds with the Raimi films. 4 years later, you had Amazing Spider-Man, which is a very short amount of time. You had the Incredible Hulk film as well. Well, you could argue again the Eric Bana one. I think which was 03. You had the what's his name, Edward Norton one in 08, and then in 2012 you had your new one as well. So it is kind of becoming a thing now, like just with a click of your finger you can reboot an entire franchise, which is mad. But this wasn't in those times. This was unheard of at this point.
No, and I think one thing to mention with this is that when jumping ahead we're going to go into, but because there's been, Tim Burton Batman films, even Batman 66, which you can see just behind my head, and obviously the Schumacher ones. As a kid, I had this 4 DVD anthology. I do like the fact they kept it as the anthology series, but I always saw them as interpretations of Batman. But like James Bond, it was just another guy playing Batman, and it just carried on. Obviously, you jump to 05 and it's not just a reboot, it's an origin story, it's a whole new, it's like Casino Royale, this is a whole new everything. This isn't a continuation. At that age you don't understand that. I didn't see it till later on. I'll tell you about that in a bit, but it's interesting reading up about what happened between 98 and 2005, because really there's a lot of ideas, and I don't think we're going to go into all of them. I'll let you take the lead on this because I know you are a little bit more attached to the character, and I think you know the early ones better than I do.
There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of conflicting information, but the main ones that I know, I think there was touted to be a third Joel Schumacher Batman film that he wanted to rush into development. Rumors are that it was going to feature Scarecrow, which obviously was a carryover into this one that we'll be talking about in a moment. And Harley Quinn, who I believe was going to be the daughter of Joker, Jack Nicholson's Joker. And even that, although we talk about reinterpretations, you still had, Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon, you still had Michael Gough as Alfred. And I guess if they were going to have Jack Nicholson in there, which they were rumored to as like fear flashbacks of the Scarecrow, it was going to be Jack Nicholson. So again, that would be tying into the original. I heard also rumors that Joel Schumacher was going to do an origin film, kind of Batman starting out, his training. That was ultimately scrapped. And then I don't know much about this film, but I've read little bits here and there. Darren Aronofsky wanted to take a crack at it. I don't know how far along he got, if it was just like an initial pitch to Warner Brothers and they didn't want to go with that. You know more about it than I do, but it sounds completely out there and ridiculous. And thank God that movie never got made. I'm all for different interpretations of Batman, but that seems like too much of a stretch for me. I've heard also that Joss Whedon had like an initial pitch, and there was all these different ideas, being thrown at Warner Brothers and non-stuck until Christopher Nolan came along, who said that he wanted to almost set it in a real life environment, keep it incredibly grounded, which is obviously what he went on and did. He wanted to explore areas of the Batman character that hadn't been explored before. Yes, you do get the origin there, but his training and different villains that we hadn't seen on screen. And I mean, fair play to them. We'll get into the characters later, but as an initial pitch, if you come to Warner Brothers and say, I want to do a new Batman film, and they go, right, which villains are you going to pick? You say Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul and Carmine Falcone. You know what I mean? It's mad that they went with it, but by God, I'm so glad they did, because they clearly went with the right choice, and you could tell that Christopher Nolan definitely had a vision for this thing. I don't think it's coincidence, but I think he has been a lifelong Batman fan. I think he has been a comic book fan. I know that there are similarities with this film to the original Superman film that came out, the Richard Donner film. And I think there's actually an interview with him and Donner, the director of Superman. So I think he even, it's been ages since I watched that. Did he visit the set or something? Or I know he did something.
So they did this limited edition, collector's edition Dark Knight Trilogy, which came with pretty much nothing except like some Hot Wheels of the cars. Anyway, I had a really cool interview with Richard Donner and Chris. It was like in a studio, just the two of them. Maybe not a set, maybe it's behind the scenes, but we've mentioned before, I think, on these videos that there's an amazing Nolan George Lucas interview.
Yeah.
And he is composed, but you can tell from the first few seconds he is definitely, I'm not going to say starstruck, but he is quite visibly different. And he's still composed, but you can tell he's with someone that he really respects and he's clearly a massive fan of because his mannerisms are ever so slightly different with him. It was the exact same with Richard Donner. It's a really good interview. I think it's about 20, 30 minutes, but I think it might have been an anniversary of one of the Superman films, maybe, but they have this conversation and Nolan talks about how influential the Superman film was to him growing up. The same that he does with Star Wars. So it's worth seeking out. I've never seen these Superman films, so I can't.
You need to at some point. You need to.
I will one day, and we'll get into the cast later, but he does mention that because of the all-star cast of Superman, that was one of his ideas, that he wanted this all-star cast.
Yeah.
With Batman Begins onwards, which we'll obviously get into because there's an all-star cast and then there is this cast. I think that's the one way to leave it as now. But you can tell his influence. I believe he said in interviews, I think it must have been the Burbs Dark Knight Rises. He spoke about, I think, his brother bought him a lot of Batman comics when he was younger. Now, I don't want to get these mixed up, but the three that come to mind, which he spoke about a lot, was Year One, Dark Knight Returns. I think it was basically all the Frank Miller 80s ones. I've forgotten the third one.
The Long Halloween, I think, was...
probably Long Halloween. Yeah. So they were kind of like, in pre-Burton Batman, this was like, okay, he's been this silly character. Now the comics are going to get dark, going to have proper writing, completely 180 the character, and essentially made him what he does go on to become. I think that's really important to mention as well. You can tell that he has immediate respect for these comics because with his pitch, when you mention he goes to Warner Brothers and says, I want Ra's al Ghul, I want Scarecrow. Obviously, he teases Joker at the end. Because he's obviously read these comics, it's quite clear, jumping to further down the line, he's got story arcs he wants to do for minor characters which haven't had that on film before. And you can tell that he's very much influenced. Certainly, jumping in right now, this will be a discussion that probably comes up more than once across these three reviews for the trilogy. Batman Begins is by far the best Batman film. Yeah. As in specific to the character, to the heritage, to the comics. It is definitely the best in that sense. And we'll obviously keep bringing these up, but certainly the influences are far more clear in this, which does help to create the universe for the next two to come in and thrive. So I think it's quite important. But as far as a pitch goes, I'm going to say this before we get into it further as well, that Warner Brothers struck gold. They obviously in 2005, this film's made it's made okay money. It's not outgrossed Batman 89, but it's not obviously the club it became. It did come out a month after episode 3, but what they had here was critical praise, which the last film didn't have. They had solid foundations to build off. Obviously, down the line, they get Oscar nominations for this film as well. It's not your normal boring ones. They got like cinematography, which would have been quite remarkable in 2005 for a comic book movie to get as well. And Warner Brothers just sat there like, whoa, okay, this is the guy we've got, brilliant. Obviously, we'll go way more into that for Dark Knight because that's when it reaches the next level. But certainly the trend that follows this trilogy is all these big companies start hiring these up-and-coming directors because they're hoping that they can get a Nolan out of it. And I know that's a horrible euphemism, but bring up Mark Webb, for example, who did the amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, the most ironic names of all time for a franchise. He was
hired on that name alone, I think. That was the one reason.
He did, 500 Days of Summer, and they thought, okay, here's a good indie director. Let's chuck him in at the deep end, give him Spider-Man, but actually we're going to control Spider-Man, not him.
Yeah.
And it seems to me, again, we'll get into it, that Warner Brothers gave Nolan, I'd say 90% creative freedom on this film. It's pretty much there.
It was his vision, definitely. Obviously, David S. Goyer, who I'm going to check his. I think he does have a very hit and miss track record. He has involvement, I think, on like Man of Steel by the looks of it. Screenwriting works include the Blade trilogy, but I know that he directed Blade Trinity, I believe, which is the worst one. Batman v Superman. So he has had some swings, hits and misses across the board, but I think he's definitely sort of like the comic book guy, which I think is why inherently Batman Begins is the most comic booky of the Nolan trilogy, of the Dark Knight trilogy. And I do think that Warner Brothers probably, Christopher Nolan had proven himself beforehand with this, with the likes of Memento and Insomnia, still very relatively small films, did well for their budgets, and handing off the keys to a kingdom like that. And a lot was riding on this as well, especially for the Batman name. You had like all coming up to a decade of absence of Batman on the big screen. I definitely think that Warner Brothers wouldn't have just like given the trilogy, given the vision completely over to him. And Warner Brothers are revered for meddling, stepping in, pushing schedules forward and everything like that, and are still doing that to this day. They're very reactionary. I definitely think it's inherently his vision. You watch it, it is his movie, but I think more so with this one, you've got that. I actually think it's a perfect blend for this one. And it's a very, very difficult blend to get right. Director and studio working together. I think you had it for the first Tim Burton film. And then when that proves to be a success, then I think they ease up. They give the director more control over the next film. We saw that with Batman Returns, which is a film that I absolutely love. I love Tim Burton's style in that, but I know that that was initially what turned a lot of people off to that take on the character when they went bright and campy with it. And we can see it with Batman Begins into Dark Knight as well. You go into Dark Knight, and we'll talk about more on that when we get to our review on it next week, but that is pure 100% Nolan through and through. In terms of everything with the film, and I don't think maybe you had that with this one, but I didn't open my review with this. This is my favorite of the trilogy. I think, as I mentioned, that perfect blend. What I love most about this movie, I'll go into my first time watching the film in a moment. This is inherently a Batman story, which, you know, Batman does have like a big impact in the next movie, and obviously has, I'd say actually Batman has the least amount to do in Dark Knight Rises. That's more of a Bruce Wayne story. But with this one, this is everything you want as a Batman fan. You are getting that origin story. You're exploring new territory. It stays true to the source material and everything like that. And it's showing us new things we haven't seen before. All the villains fit perfectly in with each other with the story that's being told. It is inherently a perfect comic book movie. And I think that's where I differ. I like the fact that it is a comic book movie in that sense of the word. When you watch it, it still does feel like one of those big budget kind of Batman films, whereas Dark Knight is more of a crime film, and it kind of gets away from that inherent comic book image kind of thing, I guess what I'll say. But where would you, before we go into our first thoughts, where would you stack this up with the rest of the trilogy?
It's difficult because I know my number one for many different reasons.
I know your number one.
Yeah, it's hard to guess it. There's only two other options. Begins is weird because the problem is, and I saw this trilogy the other day. It's the first time I've done them back to back to back, which was quite an experience. But I love all three. I think that's important for me to say. I love all three, each to their own, in their own ways. You know, to me, this is my second favorite on paper. This is, to me, I think the second best. But I had a very different experience watching Rises the other day, where I liked it more than I'd not gone off it at all the last few years, but I'd kind of dropped my guard with it, and I've found myself really enjoying it again and still thinking it's good. But to me, it's hard because it's kind of like the original Star Wars trilogy, where it's like, okay, you got Empire and Return of the Jedi. Like, Empire's my favorite deep down. It's the one I think's best deep down. But like Return of the Jedi's like there. Like there's nothing in it. And it's the same with Begins and Dark Knight. It's fundamentally an incredible film. And I think one of the reasons maybe down the line why my experience could be vaguely different is because jumping into the first time watching this, I saw this film the day after I saw The Dark Knight.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's news to me.
Right. So I'm going to jump into this. The same story is going to crop up in our Dark Knight review, but we're on holiday in Spain in 2008. This came obviously all over. The whole world was like TV spots, Joker everywhere. So you heard about Heath Ledger passing. I hadn't seen anything he'd done before, so I didn't have that connection. I wasn't into films at this point in time to the level I would become literally the moment I saw The Dark Knight. But I just remember we always used to, as a family, it's very strange. We'd come back from holiday, we'd always eat a meal at the same restaurant, and like the day after we'd go to cinema. No idea why. It's a very weird tradition that doesn't happen anymore. But obviously, when you're in Spain, you get, back in the day, for you British people home, you get 5 channels. Every advert was The Dark Knight, and it looked incredible. Oh my God, we need to see this. Then if anyone's ever been on holiday, you know, you didn't have the internet back then. You used to have to go to the shops, get papers that were printed in English. So all these pages were all about, this film is devastating. This is really rude. This shouldn't be a 12. This should be a 15. This is this. And all this is build up hype to Dark Knight in my head. And I am on the right review. Don't just wait to it. So we get home from Spain, and my parents are like, okay, we're going to watch Dark Knight tomorrow. We need to get a copy of Batman Begins. Now, I'd never seen it. I didn't own it. So they went to a shop, bought it. I believe I was at a friend's house that day. So I hadn't seen it. So we went to the cinema the next day. And Hunting Begins, didn't know anything about it. I'd read a little bit online that there was an ending scene with the Joker cards, which meant, Joker's going to be in it. But I went in not knowing anything about the Dark Knight Trilogy. I came home, was like, okay, I'm going to watch Batman Begins now, immediately after. So my experience is the 180. It's completely the wrong way around. I'm not quite sure how that happened. And I don't know if that's got anything to do with why I prefer Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a crying shame because I would have loved to have seen this at the cinema at the age of, when it came out, I was 9 years old. Like, it came out at the same time as Revenge of the Sith, and this went so under the radar. And I'm just going to say, because of Revenge of the Sith, I grew up on Batman 66 and the Joel Schumacher ones. I didn't see 89 or Batman Returns until after The Dark Knight also. I'd never watched them films, so The Dark Knight was the real game changer of me going back and watching all these, because I'd only seen Forever and Batman and Robin, so that was a really big thing. And obviously I loved watching Batman Begins, but ultimately I knew the ending, that he obviously was going to live, but the Joker would be in the next film, and I knew that Gordon was this and Rachel would die. I was like, why is it Katie Holmes? And it was a really nice experience.
The personality of the Joker as well, like seeing that caliber of villain, not to take anything away from the villains in Begins, I love them, but to see that and then maybe to go back where, wow, okay, that explains a lot.
This is the thing; it's crazy, and I can't believe I've never told that, but yeah. So I'm gonna have to repeat this in a couple of days. The Dark Knight. Sorry, folks, if you're watching that too. But what I will say is that 5 days ago, I got to see this film at the cinema for the very first time in my life. It's 2020. It's 15 years old. It was rescreened for the IMAX Trilogy Marathon. Fun fact I discovered after watching this film: this was one of the first blockbusters shown on IMAX. It was never filmed on IMAX, but this was one of the first blockbusters shown at IMAX screens in 2005. In 2005, there were virtually no IMAXs, so you can't exactly say it was a big thing. But as terms of Nolan, we'll get to it later, but it's kind of like a tease of what's to come. I'll play one of my films in this new format. Obviously, you get to Dark Knight, I'm filming in the format. So I think that's worth bringing up, but I want to hear yours, because I've probably just completely shocked the system with that revelation.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, I'd seen all of the five, I guess. Well, I guess there's technically six if you count Mask of the Phantasm. I hadn't seen Mask of the Phantasm at that point, but I had seen your 66, your two Tim Burton ones, and your two Joel Schumacher ones. Obviously, I've said this on repeat many, many times. The first Batman film I ever watched was Tim Burton's original 89 one, when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, and that still did stay with me. So that in my head was Batman. The music, the image, the gothic look of everything, that was Batman to me. Even as a kid, I did enjoy Batman and Robin for what it is, but I still always gravitated to the more darker ones, Batman Returns. I remember I didn't go and see this at the cinema. I don't remember much buzz around it coming out, which is mad considering it was a Batman film. And as a Batman fan, I never went to see this at the cinema. I would have, 2005 would have been about 12, I think. Something like that, maybe. Yeah, I'd have been 12. But I didn't see this at the cinema. I got this on DVD. And I remember watching it, and I think I was initially... I had a very short attention span at a young age. Thankfully, that's changed now with my movies, and I can do very, very long films. I can do films that are upwards of 4 hours. But at the time, I was struck by the very different feel to it. It was kind of like a shock to the system. This wasn't what I was used to from a Batman film. You're used to Batman punching people, lots of action, big bombastic music and everything like that. And you didn't really get that with this one. This is kind of, again, like another comparison to the original Superman movie, but this film's 2 hours 20. We don't get Batman in the suit until after the hour mark, which is mad. And that's similar to the Superman movie. I think Superman gets in the costume about 45 minutes into that movie. So you do get a lot of time establishing the previous character before, but it just felt different. I did love the villain of Scarecrow, and I really wish that we could have seen more of him, but I think that was more me wanting that villain aspect, that costumed villain aspect to it. I didn't come out of it completely blown away. There were things that I liked about it, but I was immediately struck with the slower pace of it and the different tone of it, and the more, even at that point to me, 12-year-old me, the more adult tone, the more grounded tone. So it wasn't one that I went back to all that much. I watched it a few times, and I actually think I bought Prestige around about the same kind of time on DVD, because I was interested enough to see more of what this director had done, Christopher Nolan. I bought Prestige, and I think Prestige was the movie that won me over into his kind of style. Again, you had the comparison. You had Christian Bale coming on from it, as well as Michael Caine. So there was that link there between the two movies. And then Begins just kind of became really nostalgic to me, even in terms of the trilogy itself and the mad hype, which we'll talk more about in our Dark Knight review. That was sort of, after a long time, you had Revenge of the Sith, and then after that, the big event movie for me at that age was The Dark Knight, where I was watching every trailer, I was watching every TV spot, saving every image off the website and everything like that. But it all started from Batman Begins, my hype for Dark Knight, because I wanted to see the ending of this film. You know, we still haven't picked up Crane or half the inmates of Arkham that he freed, and it's like, oh, we're going to get all these things, and you're trying to create your own story in your head of where it's going to go. So this was sort of like a one that progressed over time for me in terms of my initial opinions. I didn't hate it when I first watched it, but it didn't sort of stay with me. And I think that, as you mentioned, like, this is definitely a very different feel of a Batman movie. It is the best Batman film, and it is the most complex at this point as to what we had. And I think that maybe even Dark Knight, you know, in terms of like a kid's comic book movie, I don't know if I would have liked to have watched Dark Knight as a kid. If I was going to the cinema, like, we're going to go and see the new Batman film, The Dark Knight, I don't think it really has that sort of vitriolic, Avengers kind of feel to it, which is great that it doesn't have that, but it is very different. And I think I wasn't used to different at that point. Thankfully, that's changed now.
Yeah, I think one thing it begins, for move on, it's really worth mentioning this improved massively with time. I say improved. I enjoyed it the first time. This is one that I didn't respect. I respect it, but I didn't have the level of respect I do now. You know, once more of these comic book films start coming out, where you're getting peppered with them left, right, and center, you're getting more and more origin films, and then you'll go back every so often and watch Begins. It's like, this is better than pretty much everything. And I get the same experience with Dark Knight. Even of the MCU, I adore Marvel. I've said on this channel a lot. I really enjoy their films. The good thing about being so many of them, when there's one that you're not keen on, another one comes out 3 months later, so you don't have to really worry. And then their origin is as good as this. There's not been an origin as good as this. So I think, as someone, as a kid who grew up with the Raimi Spider-Man films, they were massive for my childhood. Not to the level that Star Wars and Dark Knight were, but in that gap between the Raimi films, for superheroes, that was everything I ever needed. Cool villains, cool heroes, a bit on the adult side, but you had enough to enjoy yourself from. I'd have been very intrigued if I'd have been at a similar age watching this. I think you're right. I don't think you'd enjoy it as much. I'm not saying it's too smart for kids, but I like the fact that this film was intentionally made for, I want to say, younger adults. Because, and to be fair to Warner Brothers, to Batman, the criticism of the Burton ones were, it's too weird, it's too this. Now we've got to do kids' films. They don't work. So, okay, now we're going to take this punt and go for one slightly more mature, which they've kind of tried to keep Batman to, I guess, over the last sort of 15 years, and feel like they're going to keep him at that maturity now, which I think that character is rightfully deserved. So much as I adore Batman 66, you can't release that in modern day. So I think that's quite important going into this. This does feel, I mean, we're half an hour in, we've barely got to it.
I know.
I think it's worth mentioning now. A really big thing is the characters and the cast.
We need to jump in with the man himself, really, don't we? Bruce Wayne, Batman. So there was actually a lot of people up for this role. I was just having a look at some of the names on there, most notable ones. Henry Cavill was up for it. Billy Crudup was another one. Jake Gyllenhaal, Heath Ledger, and Killian Murphy, who I believe did actually screen test for this thing. I think you can probably find it on YouTube somewhere. And although he didn't get the role of Batman, thank God, I don't think, not to take anything away from Killian Murphy, he's one of the finest actors in the business, but he would not have fit the role of Batman. Nolan could clearly see that, but he was impressed with what he saw, and thankfully cast him as Jonathan Crane, which I thought was a perfect fit. But Christian Bale, so I've always said he's not my favorite Batman. It is still always going to be Michael Keaton, and that's definitely nostalgia, but he is still my favorite. But this was the first one where Bruce Wayne really became a character. Yes, Bruce Wayne had like roles and everything, but it was never really focused upon in all the other Batman movies. Hinted at slightly in the first Tim Burton film, but that's about it. This was the one that saw the importance of establishing Bruce Wayne and his persona and his character and his history before you even get to the costume. Obviously, everyone wants to see Batman in action. Of course we do. We're paying to see a movie called Batman Begins, but what's integral about this movie is getting the right actor that can play both sides. It's very interesting with the people that you get to cast Batman. You are really asking them to play two different characters because the character of Bruce Wayne and Batman are so intrinsically different to each other. And I think Bale nails it, especially in this movie. I think this is his strongest Batman performance out of the three films, again, for me. The voice is often remarked upon, and yes, you have that one moment in this film with the "where are the other drugs going," which is more of what we get in terms of voice in the other two. But I think he found a really good balance with this one in terms of the performance, and it's my favorite Batman out of the trilogy.
I'm with you on that. Christian Bale, I adore. Again, being late to the party, I saw Dark Knight first. It's a nostalgic thing. I think it's it's who's your favorite Batman, who's your favorite Bond. It's a generational question. It's a personal question, I think, to when you first got attached to the character. I think those two go hand in hand with each other, those franchises. But Christian Bale, again, I hadn't seen any film he'd ever been in when I watched Dark Knight. And the problem is I have to go to Dark Knight because I saw this but what strikes me Begins is, again, as I grow older, get into film more, is, Bale's in my top 3 actors, and he has been for a long time. Adam Driver's still currently at top spot, but Christian Bale has always been there. It doesn't matter what film, Batman, The Fighter, Ford v Ferrari,
American Psycho.
American Psycho comes up a lot. I'm not as keen as the others. I didn't like Vice. I liked him in Vice, but he's, to me, arguably the best actor of not. I don't want to say this generation, but this sort of last 20-year period. I'm not saying like a new breed because I feel there's a new set coming in, but Christian
Bale
Bale
throws himself into his roles, doesn't he? Physically, and he understands the character, what he needs to play.
If Christian Bale is going to do a role, I will go and watch that film because he doesn't just pick roles for the sake of it, except maybe Terminator. He doesn't jump in for the franchises. He doesn't just do the Oscar bait, Okay, he's got performance to be nominated, but I don't think he picks films thinking I could win an Oscar. Christian Bale picks the film and goes, okay, I want to play this character. I want to do this story. And that's what fascinates me as I grew a bit older, can look back at Batman Begins, that he, as both Bruce Wayne and Batman, is perfect. I think the age he was, even the looks, even in Begins, when they go to the flashbacks of him being like late teens, and they manage to like de-age him via the power of costume and hair, not CGI. He suits every iteration we get, even going down the line to Rises. That Bale was perfect for this, I feel, and in this sort of gritty, realistic approach to Batman, I don't think there's few actors in real life, modern day, that could have done a realistic take because it all seems so natural to Christian Bale. And, an example from this is the dinner party scene. There's so many great scenes in this film, but the fact that he can make Bruce Wayne at the click of a finger be a convincing drunkard to get everyone out of his party.
Yeah.
Because obviously the whole point of this is that Bruce Wayne is the mask, Batman is the person, blah, blah, blah. But he's so convincing in all of his takes throughout this film, what I think is integral. If he doesn't work as Batman, this film doesn't work. Everything came down to him. And I think it's really worth bringing up that obviously you've got this incredible supporting cast to go with him, but every single person has their part. Everyone has been cast to perfection. I've got no issues with any casting across this entire. Actually, we're going to talk about her shortly. I've got no issues with all but probably one casting choices across this trilogy. Okay. I don't know if that's jumping ahead. Obviously, we'll discuss some of them down later films, but I think Christian Bale steals this. It's the perfect film as well to put his name onto that map. To be, I don't even want to say he's an A-lister, but he's in his own niche. But to a lot of people, he'll always be Batman. But he can use that to generate new projects. And going back to some of his older films, due to the popularity of Batman, I think is another thing. I've not seen The Machinist, but the only reason I've heard of it is because of Christian Bale, as many people probably have.
And I wanted to bring that up as well in terms of what he got down to in terms of weight. I was doing conversions with numbers while you were talking there. So he got down for Machinist, which came out a year before they were rolling cameras, I think, or a year before Batman Begins. He got down to 120 pounds, which works out to 8.5 stone. I mean, if you've seen a still image, that's all you need to see from The Machinist. You know how deathly ill he looks in that movie in terms of how thin he got. And, you know, even Nolan had his reservations about casting Bale. He was like, I like you, Bale, but like, there's no way that physically you can get in shape to play Batman. And, you know, with lots of food, working out, and probably something else, he got it actually more. He got bigger than what he needed to be. He got too big to even be in the Batman suit, and then had to cut a bit more, which is, it's mad. But that just goes to show the dedication to Bale as an actor, and what he knows what he needs to do to be that character and to play that character and to understand that character. I think even in the screen test, he pretty much had his Bat voice down, like he already had cemented the character. And I mean, just the dedication to anyone to do that, to change yourself that physically for a role, is incredible. As I said, he's not my Batman, but he definitely made the role his own. He definitely made it sort of like the most believable Bruce Wayne aspect for me, at least. He's my favorite Bruce Wayne. I will say that. He's just not my favorite Batman. That's the difference. But yeah, no, fair play to him for that. And even I guess we can talk about the costume and everything as well,
Yeah.
like the complete redesign for that and the image and everything like that. They needed to make it a bit more flexible. That goes more into it in Dark Knight, right? Dark Knight, sorry, with the whole turning your head thing, which is like a running joke with all of the costumes they had up until that point. I love the costume in this thing and the redesign on everything too, just sort of the aesthetic, you know, the new Batmobile. And I will say this and Dark Knight, especially probably more so in Dark Knight with the whole sonar vision and everything, the impact that has had and still has in terms of the Batman aesthetic, the Bat tank kind of thing, which we see another iteration of that again in Batman v Superman, a very similar kind of militaristic design. The Arkham games, especially with the whole use of radar and using fear takedowns and using fear against the enemy, that was an aspect we hadn't really seen to the Batman character, and it kind of all stemmed from this one, really. I know you've had the comic books in terms of the visual media. This was the one that really has kickstarted this brand new image of the Batman character. Even the Reeves trilogy, I know we haven't seen much from it, but even in terms of the still shots that we have seen, it looks like it is still going with that much more grounded and dark street level kind of vibe to it.
The costuming begins, I love. Again, when you've seen Dark Knight first, it makes it a bit harder because I think that had arguably the best Batman costume of the entire films. Even though it changes ever so slightly. Off topic, the Batmobile I want to talk about, because the moment I laid eyes on this, it became something I wanted, which no human is ever going to be allowed to have. It's a Lamborghini tank. There's no hiding it, and it's one of the greatest inventions I've ever seen in my life. It's incredible. I almost spent £300 on a sealed Lego one, which is RRP's 140 quid, that retired 5 years ago. Just the design of it, and you know, the whole gritty reel, and you know, I love, even as a choice, is like, okay, Wayne Enterprises had this design idea for this machine thing, and it's like, okay, it's mine, it's going to be in black. And I know that's like a running joke in the films too, but his vehicles, his costume, his gadgets, what he's doing in these films, it perfectly suits him. I don't think, off the top of my head right now, maybe I'm on the spot, but I don't think he has any device or any individual thing that's too unrealistic for a realistic take on Batman. Maybe the Bat to a point, but they try and ground that, I guess, as much as they can with its maneuverability and stuff like that. But I think they're really important for this iteration, that you do need that stuff because it all adds to the equation of the character. And even the little things, you know, who would have thought years ago, why does Batman everything? Well, you know, inside his sort of helmet thing, there's just a microphone. It's like, did we need to see that being added in? Absolutely not, but it's incredible because it just added a layer. Even the side comment, like, you know, to avoid someone getting cautious about one mask being ordered from China, we put an order in 10,000. It's funny, but it's kind of like, you know, yeah, people would start looking into who's been buying masks at convenient times, and it's all the little things that build up. And even the Batcave, I think we could maybe add into the chat.
Yeah.
That, you know, that was built on a humongous set at Shepperton. It wasn't a location. Obviously, it couldn't be for what they were trying to do, but even that looks good. And obviously, you get to Rises, they do it up a bit, which is fine. But it's this whole new dynamic to the Batman character we've seen, but it's done it. It hasn't copied anything from 89 or 66 or Schumacher's. It's completely trying to be its own thing. but it's not distancing itself away from the previous. It's paying respect, I believe, to all of it. And I'm completely off topic, but it all builds up to this take on Batman from obviously Bale and Nolan.
Yeah.
I think that's as much as I can say on him before we get into some others, because obviously it's his interactions with the other cast members that make them who they are too.
Definitely. I'm just going to work in order right now with the cast list. So I've got Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth. So I've been rewatching all of I probably could have got away with not rewatching this one because I have seen it so many times, but it has been nice going back to them all. And as soon as Michael Caine showed up as Alfred, I did kind of let out this sigh like, oh, it's Michael Caine as Alfred. I don't know. He's so sweet in the role. I love Michael Caine. He's one of my favorite actors, and he's a very different Alfred. I will say that, like, I've got nothing against Michael Gough's Alfred at all. He is the classic butler character. This one, I think they add a bit more to his character. I think they hint at that military history that he had, that he can handle himself. We see that a little bit when Wayne Manor's on fire, and he can handle himself if he wants to. But Michael Caine just brings just a whole level to the character and that emotional support. He isn't just that butler character that helps out. He is an actual character. He tries to keep Bruce Wayne on the straight and narrow. There's a lot of moments, especially around like the origin parts of this, where he's trying to comfort Bruce. Very touching scene which is really nice that it kind of gets reprised as well in the Dark Knight, where he says like, I prepared a little supper, and Bruce Wayne just ignores him. He's like, very well, sir, and he turns to go, but then he's always there to comfort him. It's kind of becomes a running joke eventually that he always goes on like these long-winded stories and analogies and everything like that, which are kind of funny, but I just love Michael Caine. And he brings the humor as well. Like, there's a few little quippy lines that he has. One of our favorite jokes, our shared favorite jokes in this movie as well, is with Michael Caine. He just brings so many different levels to the character. And again, a side character, an important side character, and one that inherently you probably don't need to spend all that much time with. But for what they do, he is an integral character in the core and sort of Batman's emotional support structure, I guess.
I think what's important with this, even with the role of Alfred on Michael Caine, this being Nolan month, this is the first of, I want to say, 7 in a row. I just need to get my numbers right.
It all started from this one, didn't it, really?
And famously, those that don't know, Michael Caine rejected this film. Chris Nolan approached him and said, I'd like you to play Alfred. And the butler, no. I remember reading this autobiography, it blew my mind. Chris Nolan knocked on his door, came to his house with the script, and was like, please read this. It's Christopher Nolan. He obviously stayed for the duration of him reading it and then took the script and left. Which is obviously the norm now, but probably not in 05. This young up-and-coming director to an established veteran with so many Oscar nominations, etc. And I think really you mentioned the emotional support. Alfred is that he is the both the maternal and the paternal fathers of Bruce Wayne in this. He raises him. He has the story arc. He cares for him. They have a very, I think the chemistry between Michael Caine and Christian Bale is genuine. Some of it the dialogue's great. It seems natural. You do get the long-winded stories, which are great. They have their purposes, but it's even the little one-liners which just add, I think, another level to it all, where it's like, okay, he can get away with making that joke, and I don't think you can ever top Michael Caine as Alfred. I love Michael Gough in those early films, as we mentioned. He didn't have a lot to do, but as the butler, he was perfect. But Michael Caine as kind of the assistant, I forgot the name. What's the Batman character that sits in the computer down the line? Barbara Gordon in that. Comics.
Yeah, she becomes Oracle. Yeah,
he's kind of that role as well. He's the associate, and he's a massive importance across this trilogy. So I think casting him right is great, but also as well as Christian Bale, Michael Caine also has great chemistry with every other actor he appears in these films. Which is testament to Michael Caine. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead because I know the cast is stuff, but is it wise to go into Morgan Freeman next? Maybe, I don't know, that's me being ageist, but...
No, let's do... I did actually want to bring up the age, though, because, I mean, after this, just Alfred, very, very quickly, we had Jeremy Irons. Sadly, I don't think we got enough screen time with him to really cast a judgment. He was fine for what it was. But we've got Andy Serkis as the next Alfred Pennyworth. Now, we both love Andy Serkis. The guy can do no wrong. He's a tremendous character actor and everything he's done for the motion capture industry and everything like that. But I think with Alfred, it helps to have an aged actor a little bit, because you immediately, like, when they talk, they command that presence. You listen. They are that, that teacher, that mentor aspect to them. And I don't know whether you're going to have that so much with Andy Serkis. Obviously, this is all speculation at the moment, but I like that they got an actor of the caliber of Michael Caine, that whole, like aged character. And again, Morgan Freeman moving on to this character now, Lucius Fox, a character we hadn't seen in the films until this point, but a very pivotal character, especially in this trilogy. And thankfully now in sort of like other Batman media, the video games and everything, Lucius Fox is now like a staple character in a lot of those things now. And I think it all came from this.
I think, but going back to the not Michael Caine, sorry, Andy Serkis. We both love him. We both said it. We wish he was going to be Penguin. I'm intrigued to see what they do. I think he's going to have a bigger role because he's younger, but at least it kind of is going to differ it from Michael Caine ever so slightly. But Morgan Freeman in these films is great. He has all the memes and I am God. He is, he is this, he is that. He's a legend in his own right. But to me, in these films, he's a supporting character. You never get too much of him, but you never have more or less than what he deserves. He always has about it. He's got, again, great chemistry. I'm going to keep saying that. Not just with Michael Caine, but with Christian Bale as well. He works perfectly for his own arc, I guess, in the first film. He starts off as the, I worked for your father. He liked me. The new guys don't, so I'm rotting down here. Obviously, he's, don't take me for an idiot. I don't need to know what you're doing. Blah, blah, blah. I think Lucius Fox is a nice addition because in this grounded world, someone that works for the company that's car is on the news would be like, hey, isn't that our car company? Isn't that our suit? Isn't this ours? And I think by having that sort of Wayne Enterprises staff member on his side, I think that, again, built into that realism a little bit more that he could get away with the request with the new tech. And obviously it comes full circle at the end with the great, didn't you get the memo quote? One of the probably the nicest sort of nods of the head in that because it's great.
That always gets a laugh, doesn't it? That one at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I said this to you the other day. There was some guy like almost hounding with laughter when I saw it on Saturday, and I just started thinking like, is watching it for the first time, or he laughs like this every time he gets that bit. It's a great line. It's a great moment, and I know it's silly because it's one line, but I don't think many actors could have pulled that off. It's the charming smile whilst doing it. We'll get to that scene in The Dark Knight with the lawyer. We'll get to that next week when we get to discuss that. But Morgan Freeman has a lot to do. Arguably, he's got more to do than he needed in these films, but that's not a criticism. That's a great thing. I think his role gradually develops more into Dark Knight and then drops off a little bit in Rises. But certainly for the Batman Begins story, getting the antidote out, helping him, I think there's a really nice new dynamic in there. And to be fair to Nolan, you mentioned new character. We get Rachel as well, who we'll talk about, but he's not afraid to create new characters. And we've kind of had this completely off point when we've criticized some of the more recent Marvel films. Certainly Spider-Man's the most one. When they take these characters with these legacies and do their own thing to them, sometimes it's so 180, 300% away from the comics. And it doesn't need to be fully, it can be interpretation. But when it reaches this point of being a complete new character, just give them a new name, like Lucius Fox, like Rachel Dawes. You don't need to shovel, imagine if Rachel's Vicky Vale, it'd be like, but why? It's not her job. It's nothing to do with it. It's just you want that name. I like in these films that he's not afraid to do that and put his own stamp on it with new names and new ideas. And I think Morgan Freeman's one of the epitomes of that too.
Well, Lucius Fox was a character in the comic books. I do want to say that Rachel Dawes wasn't. He was a fictional creation, but it's just that for some reason they never sought to bring him into the movies at that point. He does kind of serve as, I don't want to say a plot device because he's not just a plot device, but he is a lot of exposition scenes. It's like, right, I need this new gadget, got it covered. He's the Q essentially of this one. I did get the right name, didn't I? Q is the guy. Yeah, that's right. You're the Bond guy. I'm but a lowly casual Bond fan, but and that goes back to the whole realism thing as well, in that you do have like all these outrageous gadgets, but it never seems out of the realm of possibility in this film. I think that this is something that, I mean, we differ greatly on our opinions on Dark Knight Rises, but that is something that I think the realism kind of falls apart in that movie to some degree, which I don't think does in Batman Begins and certainly not Dark Knight. But the suit itself, militaristic, the tumbler, it was built as a bridging vehicle. You get explanations for all of these things, and then it's custom made, built and everything, gas magnetic grapple gun and everything like that. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, I could see a soldier using a grappling gun, and everything has its place. Even the microwave emitter, which is probably the most clumsiest kind of one in the movie, especially because the whole villain's plan rests on that device. But with the whole military angle and everything of the applied sciences, where they say that it can be used as a weapon to disperse water and to get rid of an enemy's water supply, you're like, yeah, okay, I could see that. And his character basically serves that point. Very quickly, I wanted to bring up the late great Rutger Hauer, who is the CEO of Wayne Enterprises, just to see him in there, an actor of that caliber as well. It's really nice to throw into the movie too. We have mentioned Rachel Dawes, though, that fictional character, and we should get onto her because I know that I don't know if a lot of fans are divided on her character or anything like that, whether she was necessary or not. I really like her in this one, and I think that Katie Holmes for me is the quintessential Rachel. I never really cared for Maggie Gyllenhaal. Maggie Gyllenhaal plays it in a very different way, to the point where I don't have much emotional attachment to that character because it almost feels like it's a different character. That's just a pitfall. I know that Katie Holmes, for whatever reason, couldn't come back to do Dark Knight. We have our own speculation on that, but it's a shame because I hate, especially when you've got a trilogy, like a big major trilogy. It'd be like if you've got the Lord of the Rings films and an actor drops out of that in the second movie and you replace them. I've always had a problem with that. I know that it happens in Hollywood, but it lessens that emotional connection to me. I like that continuity between films. But I really like her for what she is. She's not just I don't want to say she's the damsel in distress, but I know that Batman has to save her twice in this movie. She has a point, she has a purpose, and I like that she ties into Batman's childhood. And one of my favorite moments in the film is that she's the one who Bruce can be himself around. Throughout like the whole billionaire playboy thing, the bit where he's walking out of the hotel dripping wet with the two European women on his arm, and then he walks past her and then immediately becomes in real self. He drops the facade, he drops the mask, even to the point where he tells her his secret identity at the end of the movie. It's a nice chemistry. I don't think it's out of place in the movie at all. I know a lot of people could go, well, Batman doesn't need a love interest like this, but I think it works. I think it definitely works a lot more than some of the other ones, like Selena Kyle. I'm basically just going to go with Dark Knight Rises here. Selena Kyle and Marion Cotillard's character. I felt like he had real chemistry with Katie Holmes in this movie specifically.
See, I'm in the weird path. I'm not the biggest fan of Katie Holmes in this. Maybe because I saw Dark Knight first, I don't know, but I don't think their chemistry was all that there. And I really liked the writing of her. I think Rachel's better written in this film than in The Dark Knight, but I think the performance is better in Dark Knight. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to sit here and say I know Katie Holmes' age and Maggie Gyllenhaal's, but for the role she's essentially playing, which is, like she's the DA's assistant, or she's obviously in the law to some degree, and she's the kind of almost hothead, I'm going to keep investigating this and this. I don't think Katie Holmes pulled that off, I think she's still great in it, but I think because I knew what we get, it makes it harder for me to go back to the previous one. Albeit she has a lot more to do in this. Essentially, the whole trilogy, what happens does revolve around her character. But you're right; it's the moments with Bruce / kind of Christian Bale where he drops the act, he gives away the identity. Obviously, by the time he gets into the third one, he's given it away to a few people. But in this one, she is the only one that knows. And it's done in a great way. It's not tacky. It's not, I'm Batman, big bravos reveal. It's the most, it's like a question, I guess he kind of says, like hints at it. But
it reminds me actually of the first Raimi Spider-Man film where he kisses her at the end at the funeral and she kind of has that realization. It's more blatant in this one than it is at the end of Spider-Man.
Yeah. And I think she's great in it, but I like the fact we had, I don't want to compare it to Princess Leia, but it's the kind of, here's the damsel in distress character, but we're actually going to make her written to the point where she can actually do things herself. She's just getting caught up in the wrong way. I think that's a really good comparison. I know that Batman does have to save her, but she's got her taser, which works a couple of times.
Works a charm against Scarecrow. That's him out of the movie. That's him out of movie one.
I did enjoy it, but I like the fact we had an original character to take us forward, because to me, Rachel's now, look at the legacy of the Batman supporting characters, and Rachel Dawes is up there now with your Vicky Vale. I know Catwoman's always going to be probably that heightened, but I think Rachel's reached a point where she's probably on par with the others. That's down to 2 films, no comics. Obviously, she might have been in comics since, I'm not going to say I've researched that, but I like the fact it was someone new, someone original. And obviously, we'll have to discuss it a little bit more in Dark Knight, maybe, because it does change quite a bit in obviously the character arc.
I think the Leia comparison is very fair. I think there is more to a character. Even Vicky Vale going back, she is the damsel in distress. She's like Willie Scott from Temple of Doom, where every single second she's screaming to an obnoxious degree. And then, like, what are the other ones? To me, Michelle Pfeiffer, Catwoman's always going to be at the top for me. I thought that chemistry was brilliant between her and Michael Keaton. You've only really got Nicole Kidman, and she just wanted to get in Batman's pants. That's literally her entire character. So there's definitely a lot more to say about Rachel Dawes and the ties that they have and that bond that she has. We need to Gary Oldman, the last of the good guys. I feel like we need to do with this one because this was the first one that started the trilogy. I think this is going to ease up as we go into the rest of the trilogy. Yeah. Gary Oldman, who was originally going to be cast as Ra's al Ghul, interestingly, because Gary Oldman is known for playing a lot of villains. Before this point, you had like The Professional. That's probably the main one I can think of as him being a villain. He's been in a lot of films where he's played a bad guy, but it made that switch. Nolan made that switch and had him as Gary Oldman, as James Gordon. And in all honesty, to this point now, I can't see anyone else in that role. And it was nice to see Commissioner Gordon. I know he did a little bit in the animated series and he's done a lot in the comic books, but in terms of the big screen, Pat Hingle was always just there in the background. Nothing against Pat Hingle. He was fine for those movies for what they were, but it was nice to see Gordon become as much more of a fleshed out character alongside the likes of Batman himself. And we even said this, we both agree on this, that we think that Gordon probably has one of the better arcs across the entire trilogy.
Absolutely. Gary Oldman is an absolute legend. I've loved him since I was sort of younger. It took me years to realize that Sirius Black was Commissioner Gordon. I think everyone has that realization at least once in their lives when they find out who he is. Then you get a little bit older, you watch Leon, you start watching these films like, wow, this guy is incredible. But he will always be Gordon to me, which isn't a bad thing at all. But I think he's great in this, and the fact is he doesn't become commissioner until halfway through the second film of the trilogy. Is he sergeant, then lieutenant, and then commissioner? He has a complete arc with the police. But what happens is, when you look at these comics, it's like, why does this guy just let the bat signal go up? Doesn't he care? And you realize it's the mutual respect they have. And it's as important for Batman to build his relationship with Gordon as it is his other supporting characters. And to have giving Gordon more to do, I think just put him in a different dynamic. I don't think we'll ever get it done as well. We mentioned before we hit record about obviously Jeffrey Wright's going to play him in the next one. Jeffrey Wright's a fantastic character actor. So you've seen him crop up in a lot of the Bond films. I think the main thing he's doing that right now is Westworld, but he's the kind of guy that can come in for a couple of scenes, he'll be fine. But I don't think we're going to have Gordon in almost a protagonist level. And I think Gary Oldman is absolutely superb in this and across the three. I think his best one's The Dark Knight. Which we'll get to, but I can't take anything away from what he does. Even some of his like one-liners in this are funny, so it just added something new to it, that Batman wasn't just relying on himself. He needed the help of others, whether it's getting Rachel out of the building, blowing up the monolith on the train. He's integral to this story. And jumping ahead to the final one we see in this, he is at the end of the day the officer that's on patrol when he has to take in a young Bruce Wayne. And
that's one of my favorite scenes in the film. That actually really got me watching it. It's a film that I've seen loads. I know that scene like the back of my hand, but for some reason, this past rewatching I did, it got me choked up a little bit. It got me a little bit misty, that scene.
Normally tears go in rises when it does the flashback, which I know you're going to laugh at. But that obviously had this connection where this was the first time I've seen them and not cried. And I think when it shows it, watching it begins, I now think to rises. It was like, it's that I'm going to go, but I didn't. Which we'll get to in the Insider review, which is probably why I didn't cry. But I don't think, and I think this role is his for life. I don't think anyone else. We're going to say this actually at least a couple more times for these cast members, for the supporting ones, but I don't think you're ever going to get a better Gordon, not a better arc. Gary Oldman literally looks like a comic book come to life. I know, you don't care that we don't care. They look 100%, but he literally is him. Just almost when you look at the Harry Potter books, where pretty much everyone was perfectly cast ever in those, the exact same with most of this Dark Knight cast. So Gordon deserves his own thing, and obviously we get to explore his promotion in the next review.
Yeah, definitely. That is a story for another time. Let's quickly get onto the villains. We've got three notable ones to talk about. One kind of played by two different characters, or three different characters, I guess. Now, am I saying this right? Mr. Ra's al Ghul, one of the weirdest scenes in the film. But let's talk about Carmine Falcone first. Tom Wilkinson as Falcone. Now, I've always loved this character, but rewatching again, I really love this character. I think he nails this performance. He is the archetypal, Italian New Yorker kind of crime boss figure. He's the head of the Falcone crime family in this movie, and he's kind of your main antagonist. Sorry, for the first half of the movie, I would say he definitely does get a lot of screen time, and he is that figurehead of the mob. He is the one you've got to take down, kind of thing. And he just plays it brilliantly. I love some of his little quips and everything. The writing in this is so, every character kind of gets a line of humor somewhere or something like that. And he just sticks. It's just a great performance. And it was nice to go into that kind of thing again from the comics, never really developed in the movies or anything. It was just sort of like generic. I think there's one scene with crime bosses in '89 that when the Joker shakes that guy's hand and sets him on fire. That's basically it. But this really goes into it again, playing from those graphic novels that it's based on with more of that side of the characters. It's just an interesting angle to go into, and I really like his performance.
I've always loved him in this. Every time I watch it, I actually end up enjoying his scenes more than I should. Whether it's, I love the bar scene when I don't know if it's the New York accent, but it's the patting down. It's the I'm basically going to end you with dialogue. It shows how much of a threat he really is. There's a judge there, there's off-duty cops there, there's this and this, and I can blow your head off. And you sense that threat. And it's not a physical threat. It's just the threat. It's power you can't buy. And he says it in such a good way. And he's incredible in this. I absolutely love him. And it made me think the other day when I came out, I was like, the whole world falls apart because they take out Falcone first, and Falcone losing his empire is what creates, I guess, all the drama for Dark Knight onwards. Way looking into it too much, but it's kind of like Kingpin off the Spider-Man game. I know obviously that's a lot later down the line, but you have this character that you take him out and then it opens up the city to crime to let it all thrive, and Falcone is that. And they even say that in the film that, I own half this city. And he's great. He's got great scenes with Killian Murphy. You've got moments where the most powerful man in Gotham is crapping himself the moment he says, "My boss is coming here," which is something incredible. And then
coming here kind of moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love one final bit on him because I know we've talked about a lot of them. This is gonna be a long review, but we love it. The scenes with Scarecrow. The first scene is, I can't take it anymore. The walls are closing in. Blah blah blah. Get me out. That's your ultimate sort of mob boss. And then you've got one of my favorite jokes of them all, which is, since when did the nut take over the nut house? And then you get the incredible, the unveiling of Scarecrow, which I think is a great segue into Scarecrow.
Yeah, so Scarecrow has always been one of my favorite rogues in Batman's Rogues Gallery. He's very difficult to get right, though, especially, I would think, live action. And I think they absolutely they got the essence of the character. They got everything that the character does, his mannerisms, everything like that. It's just the performance, which is dressed down a little bit, which I'm totally fine for this universe. I think it works. The mask is incredible. They've nailed the design, but it's just like the regular business suit. And I think that Killian Murphy here, I did find a quote here, which was actually kind of funny for people who know who this character is. Where is it? He mentions about Wurzel Gummidge, which is hilarious. I wanted to avoid the Wurzel Gummidge look because he's not a very physically imposing man. He's more interested in the manipulation of the mind and what that can do. If you did now, don't get me wrong, I would love to see a Scarecrow in the straw hat and the classic Scarecrow costume and the pitchfork and everything like that. I love it. That's the comic book Scarecrow. Absolutely love it. I even love what they did in the Arkham games as well, where they made him a very Freddy Krueger kind of character with the injectors on the clawed glove hand. Thought that was a really interesting take. But Killian Murphy really works for this film, and I know that we don't really like the character, but this is the best comparison I can think of. Scarecrow in this movie for me is like the Boba Fett effect of Empire Strikes Back. Doesn't get many scenes, but the impact is there. Just every scene is incredible. I want more of it every single time. You've got maggots appearing in his face and bats and everything. The fear stuff they absolutely nailed in this film. It's some of the most interesting stuff in the film for me. I just really wish we'd have got more of Scarecrow. And I know they kind of tie his story up in almost like the kind of prologue scene from the first movie and the opening scene. Just wasn't enough for me. I wanted to see more. And it's such a shame how one of the most iconic images for me of Scarecrow in this movie is where he's in the fear gas fog at the end of the movie in the Narrows, rears up on a horse. The horse snorts flame, with Scarecrow riding it. I love that image. And then sadly, it's just tased to the face and he's out the movie. I get that Ra's al Ghul is sort of your main antagonist and Scarecrow takes more of a back seat, like a secondary villain. I just wanted more of him, which is such a shame. But the scenes that we get is incredible, and I can't think of anyone better than Killian Murphy playing the character.
I love the fact we get young Killian Murphy, who hasn't aged in 15 years, who is now, you know, when Peaky Blinders started, for those watching, this is humongous. It wasn't always big. Season 3 to 4, it just became big in America out of nowhere. For us guys that live in the Midlands, I know you've not seen it, but for like because we're not far from, I guess, I could say we're not far from there, really, Birmingham way, like we're closer to Birmingham than London.
Midlands.
It was really cool. So, look, Scarecrow is getting a lead role. That's the big thing. He hadn't had lead roles. Now he's one of the most recognizable sort of faces / accents you get, and he's an incredible actor. And I think he's so perfect. I couldn't have seen him as Batman. It's very weird if you've seen the audition tapes. You know he's not right for that role, but Scarecrow, he's perfect. He has the creepiness. I'm not saying his face is creepy, but for
it's almost like he doesn't blink, like when he's
when he's Cain. One of my favorite lines is the when the toxins used against him. It's the Dr. Crane's not here right now. If you'd like to leave an appointment, I thought that's great. It's funny, but I think he's perfect in this.
Too with Batman, where he's like got all like the black like blood coming.
The tar. They actually made that as if anyone's never seen this, the Batman hallucination. That is a real costume. You can Google it. It looks absolutely terrifying. It wasn't here's a face and a mid bit. There's a complete bat costume for I call it the tar costume because it looks like tar's coming out of his face. But Killian Murphy's great, and I think he serves the right purpose. I don't think Scarecrow's big enough to lead as a main antagonist to a Batman film. Certainly in the Nolan verse, maybe he's doing that.
Yeah, but. The big thing for me is, this will take us on to Ra's al Ghul now, the final character that we need to talk about. We've talked about a lot of characters on this thing. With the other Batman films, the first one, obviously, you just get Joker. Flat out, that's all you need. Fantastic. The next one, all the other Batman films, really, with the exception, I'd even sort of class Dark Knight Rises in this a little bit as well. The villains have never really meshed for me, the pairings that they've done. Penguin and Catwoman, what relevance do they really have? They're just familiar names thrown in a movie. Two-Face and Riddler, nothing alike. They've been thrown in the movie. The biggest offender of this, Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. I know you've got Bane thrown in there as well. He's just kind of a henchman character, which again, he kind of serves the same role in Dark Knight Rises. But certainly with Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy, a match that's just so dissimilar to each other is no comparison there. I don't know why they're in a movie together. This was the first film, and I think the best example of this, where all of the villains, in terms of the story, weave together so perfectly. You've got Ra's al Ghul, who's obviously played by Liam Neeson, and I guess kind of Ken Watanabe as well, who will be appearing in a later Christopher Nolan movie, with the goal of eradicating corruption. So ultimately has the same goal, and the villains that always have the same kind of goal, but coming at it from a different perspective, are always the most interesting antagonists. And we get that with Liam Neeson. This movie plays it with, real poise and like a quiet, reflective portrayal at the beginning of the film when he talks about his history once he had a wife, and he has those nice moments. He's a very different kind of villain. He's more methodical and dangerous in terms of the scale and the military. Essentially, the assassins that he has at his disposal, they can be anywhere. They can sort of blend in plain sight kind of thing, which is kind of terrifying. But his plan there, that he wants to rid corruption, he wants to get rid of criminality, but he's doing it on a much more damning and devastating scale. Essentially, he's going to basically ruin a whole city and let it tear itself apart, and then kind of from the ashes, that's when things are returned to the balance. Whereas Batman believes in justice. He wants the same thing. He wants to get rid of criminality, but with a much more compassionate and balanced stroke, I guess. And that's kind of effectively shown in the scene in the flashback where he gets Bruce Wayne to execute that man, and he says, "I'm no executioner," and that's perfect. That is right there is the difference between Ra's al Ghul and Batman, which is a fascinating exchange there. But also how, the blue flower and the psychopharmacology works in, and then you bring in Scarecrow, who's using that for his own end and working with Ra's al Ghul. You've got Carmine Falcone, who's bringing in the shipments, and it's this beautiful, neat package where you're taking all these different villains and their plans all work together to achieve one end. And I don't think we've really seen that before in any of the Batman films before this point. I'd say that another example of villains working well together, which we'll talk more about, is the whole Joker, Batman, Harvey Dent triangle that you've got going on there. I think that definitely works well. And again, you've got that main villain aspect with the Joker in that, and then your side character Two-Face, who is an integral and major villain in the Rogues Gallery, but perhaps one that wouldn't work so well if they were the main antagonist all the way throughout the film.
No, absolutely, and that's the perfect way to describe the set, because they all align. And the whole point of each Batman film has its own theme. You have fear for Batman Begins, you have anarchy for Dark Knight, and then physicality for Rises, which is obvious because it's Bane. It has to be. And I like that trend. Rather than having the same guy 3 times, we'll get to in Rises, but they'd have had Riddler in Rises. It was the same thing. Riddler in Nolanverse was just another Joker. It's just a one-man terrorist. And obviously we'll get to that later on, but for what they wanted to do in this one, and the whole point that Batman aside, but it's worth mentioning.
Are you still there?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, you just froze for a second there.
Okay, no worries. I think a big thing worth mentioning is getting into Ra's al Ghul now, because he wasn't always Ra's al Ghul. He was Liam Neeson. Is it Henry Deckard?
Yeah, who is also in the comic book as well, Henry Deckard. So there is a tie there.
I don't think this is intentionally tied, but one thing I discovered today is that Blade Runner was an inspiration for the Batman Begins Gotham. I know that's Deckard. It's not intentional, but Liam Neeson. Certainly for me and you, he was Qui-Gon Jinn, and he'll always be Qui-Gon Jinn to me. He is Ra's al Ghul on the side. Oh, has my internet dropped out? Can you hear me okay?
No, still good.
Perfect. Liam Neeson is one of the most wonderful mentor figures in cinema. He began as a mentor. He became this action monster from Taken onwards. But he's always just been great in everything. I generally struggle to dislike, maybe except Taken 2, and I've not seen Taken 3, but Liam Neeson, he just has this presence. It's soothing. It's great, but you kind of pay attention to him. I know that's kind of silly because you're watching a film, but Liam Neeson just has a gravitas to his roles. And in Dark Knight, in Batman Begins, he's the guy that's training him. He's taking him on. He's cruel to Bruce, but he's fair to him, and he's there for him. And Bruce chooses to spare him because this is the guy that's trained him up. Obviously, little did Bruce know that was actually Ra's al Ghul, which is undeniably one of the best low-key twists ever.
It's a nice reinterpretation of the character from the comic book. So if they were going to do straight off the page Ra's al Ghul, it would be too ridiculous for this. Yeah. That whole Lazarus pit, the sense of immortality, that when he's getting too old, he has to be bathed in this green liquid called the Lazarus pit, which rejuvenates him with the is it the head of the demon? I think it's called, or something. Spirit, and everything it takes a part of his soul away, and he becomes more and more aggressive each time he's rejuvenated. So you take that concept of immortality and you frame it from the example that he has loads of decoys, and that when he dies, there will be a new Ra's al Ghul to take his place. And then when that one, so you've got that immortality of the character in that way, in a more sort of distant sense of the word, sort of true from a certain point of view kind of thing. And I think that's perfect for this this universe that they're telling. I thought that was a really cool way of reinterpreting that. Yeah,
it's a great title for him, and I love the fact that when you get to the birthday scene, it's the revelation. It's we've been here since the start of time. Who do you think set London on fire? Who set the Great Plague? And obviously we know it's not real, but by bringing in these mini history things, it's kind of like that's a really cool way of kind of bigging them up as, not that it adds a threat because it's not real, but it adds the in realism within this world threat that they've been around for hundreds of years and they've proved that. And I think that's what makes him great. And the whole build-up of his revelation, the setting it on fire, and then you have obviously sticking true to the comics of Ra's al Ghul. You were my greatest student, and that has always been something that was hinted at in the comics. It's been in the games as well. It's been in the culture that obviously you got the whole Tyler al Ghul, which we do have to get into in a couple of films' time. But there is a history between them, and I like his scenes. The chemistry with Liam Neeson and Kristen Bale is great. I'd love to have seen more. I know we get a lot of training, but it's the kind of person where if they were having a conversation for an hour, it'd probably be incredible to listen to. And I feel that there's this immense respect in the performances between one another that I really sense that I'm not saying Liam Neeson homes it in. He has done recently. He can play the same type, but I really sense there's a new gist of life in him in this performance. I know we kind of get that obviously in Star Wars for a little bit, but I think no one expected him to be the villain because he's so often at this point in time the mentor figure. And obviously that comes into the whole Gary Oldman thing, that Gary Oldman would have been the mentor, and you would have known that. It wouldn't have surprised me if Gary Oldman pops up at the end and said, I'm the villain all along, but Liam Neeson brings a different bit of gravitas. So I've really enjoyed his aesthetics, the whole mind your surroundings running joke, which costs him, and even to the point of his death when he just shuts his eyes and embraces it. It feels true to his character of what he's trying to accomplish in the film. And you mentioned the Lazarus Pit, which is great because obviously we all remember between 2008 and 2012 the rumors that Liam Neeson was on set. Oh, they're filming in the desert. It's the Lazarus Pit. Thank God it wasn't that. I loved his cameo in Rises, but I think he's a really great addition to the Nolan verse and to the importance of the importance of Bruce, because ultimately the guy that trains Batman's got to be pretty damn good, and I think Liam Neeson has that in him. So I don't know if I've wafted too quickly about him, but there's not too much to add. He's I'm not saying he's two-dimensional, but he kind of is, but he's more intriguing kind of two-dimensional. He serves a purpose, but he has the internal conflict with the lead character.
Yeah, it's just to show that divide between the two characters. I really like that you mentioned there about the themes of the three films, which is a really cool way to look at them. And I know we need to move on to Nolan Isms in a minute, but the themes of this film is what carries it for me. It is that essence of fear, and we go back to Bruce young. He falls into that cave with all the bats. He's terrified of them. That ties in intrinsically to what makes him want to leave the opera house, which in result kind of gets his parents murdered. So there's this huge sense of guilt that's wrapped around that fear. And it's not only that sense of that he needs to confront that fear and take on that element, that disguise of a bat, which mirrors that fear that he has in order to project it onto other people. But it seems like it's a coming to terms in a way and letting go of that guilt. And there's that great moment as well where he has that sword fight with Ra's al Ghul, and he says, like, your parents' death was not your fault, which sounds like a really nice thing to say. It was your father's. And you're like, oh, hell no. Like this guy's going down now. But it shows how sort of like cold Ra's al Ghul can be. I just thought it's a really not, and then obviously with you throw the Scarecrow in there as well with the whole fear aspect around him. So it's this beautiful theme throughout the movie, which I think really works well. Clear vision from Nolan. I've got to give Goya some credit as well, because the story was done by David S. Goya, and he did help with the screenplay. You could probably kind of tell where certain elements came from. I think the more comic booky things came from Goya, and then Nolan did the rest. Before Nolanisms, though, this is a good time more than any to talk about the soundtrack of this thing. Adds to the whole revitalized thing. So Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard collaborated on the score for this thing. You've got Hans Zimmer, who took on more of the action beats of the film, and James Newton Howard focusing more on the Bruce Wayne elements and the emotional side of the film. It's a beautiful collaboration. Now, in terms of a score, this kind of goes back to my first time watching it. Danny Elfman's Batman theme is Batman to me. When you hear that score, like the church organ or whatever it starts out on the double bass or the cellos at the start, that is Batman to me. Like, unintrinsically, you hear that. It's as good as the John Williams Superman theme tied to that character. It's hummable. It's memorable. When we got to this one, and I do kind of stand by this. Obviously, when you do have a trilogy, the themes become more prevalent and you do recognize them more now because you had 3 films. With this one, there wasn't really a clear Batman theme to me. There are moments where, for example, when he opens the wardrobe and it does that zoom in on the bat suit, that's where you kick in with your main Batman theme. And it really doesn't. It plays a variation of what will eventually become the Harvey Dent theme. So there's this weird sort of lack of continuity with some of the tracks from this movie. A lot of it, to me, it fits the film completely. It fits the tone. I'm not taking anything away from that now. And I have learned to love the Hans Zimmer main Batman theme, I guess. But a lot of it does filter into background sound for this. It does add a nice texture to the film, but it's a very different score in that it isn't that hummable, heroic kind of Batman theme that you might be used to from the animated series. Even the Joel Schumacher ones with the score to those had a main theme. It's very understated. It's very there in the background, and I think it lacks an identity in this one out of the trilogy. I don't know if that's fair to say. That's not me saying I hate the score, but it's not one that I would perhaps, certainly not the Batman Begins score, is one that I would throw on in the background and listen to beginning to end.
I'm with you on that. So again, watching Dark Knight first, I was very aware of the theme because of Dark Knight. You're right; it's not apparent in this. You get a little bit. The soundtrack doesn't help that every word on the album is a species of bat. Yes, it's a great Easter egg, and it says Batman if you put them in order down. But the collaboration with Zimmer and James Howard, I love. At this point in time, I wasn't a Zimmer fan. I probably didn't know who he really was, and now the history. He did every Nolan film except Prestige and Tenet after. To me, this is up there with Spielberg and Williams. They're integral to one another. That's why I'm both excited and terrified for the Tenet score. I love Ludwig Göransson, so I'm not actually terrified. But there's the part of them where I think is Zimmer's an interview. Him and James Newton Howard said we always wanted to do something together, and then Zimmer said that we kind of split it as because he's a duo personality. He's both Bruce Wayne and he's Batman. Essentially, James Newton Howard did the Bruce Wayne side of things, and Zimmer did Batman, which I think is very apparent when you look at their other work, obviously, afterwards. But the one thing with this, which I always love, and it's not even really a riff, it's the kind of strange League of Shadows theme. It's not massively apparent, but when I've got my sort of playlist going, majority of it's Dark Knight and Rises, and a couple of songs, but I think the James Newton Howard stuff in this score is better than the Zimmer one. But obviously the groundwork of what Zimmer goes on to do, not just obviously with Dark Knight, but then Inception and then Newton Howard saying, listen, you guys are way above me now, I've got to go. And obviously Rises is Zimmer 100%. And I think the score is integral to this. I think it's great. I think it works because this film isn't necessarily the spectacle. It's got its big set pieces. Just have stuff like that, but to me, this is directly the story. I think the score works for that, especially when you've got some of the important moments. Obviously, the drama-based ones. The riffs that come. You mentioned the Harvey Dent theme. It does go on to become that, and I do enjoy the score. But of the three, this is the one I played the least. But I think it does lay the groundwork of what's to come. I should have put that on schedule. I completely missed that. I'm not quite sure how, but
it's one of those scores that it's weird in that you could take the score from this film, and I honestly think you could put this over Transformers. You could put it over more or less any kind of action film or action scene, and I think it would work. Whereas with Danny Elfman's Batman theme, that is just tied to that. I don't think you could go out of your way to take that soundtrack and put it to anything else.
I mean, they did put it to Justice League, which
the results speak for itself.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I love a theme. Again, weird Superman because I'm not seeing it. I don't have the attachment. I know the theme of the Lego games more than anything. But
yeah,
I think because I've always had my nostalgia is obviously the Dark Knight Trilogy. That's been my kind of theme. Technically, it's the 60s, Batman theme. But I love the Elfman one. But I don't think the Elfman one could work in this universe. Vice versa, I don't think you could take the Zimmer one and put it in. I feel it's maybe representing the eras of the releases more so that these days, obviously you get your themes, you look at the recent Style Studio, there's a couple, but not many, versus the old ones when you had, here is the theme that must play. And I think the soundtrack's great for what it does, but it really kickstarts the next gear in the next two.
Right, we should probably move on to Nolan Isms. This is, wow, we knew this one was going to be long, but hot damn, this is getting up there. So Nolan Isms for this, in terms of his approach to filmmaking, I mean, this was done before, but this was sort of his big studio movie. This was You've Got Batman, like, that's huge. And we definitely see it more with his later movies with the budget up there. I mean, 150 mil, it's still a very high budget, and it was definitely a lot higher than all of his other preceding films before this. But even his approach to big budget movies is to film as much of it in camera as possible. Very, very few visual effects in this movie, mostly just sort of like rear projection and stuff on the monorail scene. There was a few there. But the sheer amount of models and sets that were built for this thing, even things that you probably don't expect were sets and models. The whole monorail track, the explosion of the building of the League of Shadows, all models, and it's incredible. And even to this day, yes, you do get like your big CGI set pieces in the likes of Interstellar, for example, but even then in Inception as well. But so much of it is filmed in camera, and he tries to do as much of it as he can in practical. And I love it. The look of the Narrows as well was all built on set, and as you mentioned, definite Blade Runner inspiration there. That very rainy, disgusting, kind of disheveled, rusty look to the film. And that's what, again, with Batman Begins for me, Gotham City itself has to be a character in the film. It definitely was a character in the Tim Burton films with the look of it and the aesthetic, but in this one, this is my favorite look in Gotham. Now, I know we've had this argument off camera before that this one looks like this because we're just seeing a different part of Gotham. In Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, we're seeing sort of the rest of the city as a whole. But for me, you know, Gotham's got to be nighttime. It's got to be rainy. It's got to be disgusting. And that's exactly what I get with this one, with the Narrows and the, you know, the subway stations and everything like that. It does feel really grimy, and I love that about it.
The feel and vibe is important. This film doesn't work without it. The whole concept of the League of Shadows, you know, our first attempt was to hit Gotham with, what do you talk about, money. We wanted to, you know, they call it the Great Depression in the film, that you really get to see that it's dirty, it's grimy, there's some dodgy bars, and you get that, and then you get the lavish posh area, which you don't get as much time on in this film, which is great because it reinforces the origin and how they're trying to establish this character. Arkham City vibes, I always say to you. Obviously, this was way before Arkham City. But I think a really important thing with this is, you mentioned the shooting, that in 2005, CGI is becoming the norm. It's, you know, episode 3 has come out the month before, Spider-Man 2 the year before.
Star Wars.
Yeah, it's advancing at a crazy rate. You know, 2006 is Pirates of the Caribbean, to me, some of the best CGI ever made in Dead Man's Chest.
Even to this day, it still holds up, that film.
Yeah, and bringing Batman Begins, it's mentioned, you know, you can tell they're miniatures. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can also tell the CGI in almost all of those films we just mentioned, because it gets outdated very quickly. By shooting on film, shooting on studios, shooting on location when you needed to, creating sets, creating miniatures, it kind of set the scenes of, here's Nolan with money, because he didn't need miniatures in Insomnia or Following or Memento. This was the one where he had the chance, and by building a smaller Batmobile to drive it across the rooftops, you get these, it's the little detail, it's the little bricks falling off the roofs, it's the things like that, and it adds to it just makes it look more real, because in theory it is. And I think that's really important, not just looking at this film, the way it works, it's also approaching his films from this point onwards. We talk about the Nolan Isms, that this does become the norm. You mentioned Interstellar, you know, the Star Wars films, I'm not saying Star Wars copied it, but you went from green screen in Revenge of the Sith to, we're projecting space travel on episode 7. What did that? Interstellar. Before any filming on the ships was an Interstellar, projections were made so the actors had an environment to film in. I think that's an essential part of Christopher Nolan. We can even mention the fact he's going to Iceland in this film for shooting on location, caused issues. Did they need to film in Iceland? Probably not, but it looked bloody incredible in the shots they used it for. So I think Begins really lays the groundwork for what's going to come. And certainly when you get to the whole stunts and practical versus CGI, he uses CGI as minimal as he can. The fact that the Batmobile has like a jet engine in real life on it, just to get that crazy flame. You know, how easy would that have been to be CGI? Too easy to be CGI. And it would look great in that car design, but the realism of not doing CG, I think, adds to the realism of the environment that's been created. And that goes to show for the studio, as we mentioned, it makes it better for the characters to get better performances. It's just perfect. Obviously, there is CGI. Every film does have it. Obviously, you've got some great stuff in there. You mentioned that the flames coming out the horse. Obviously, maybe Christopher Nolan of 2020 might try and get a horse to get flames out of its nose. We'll never know. But I think it's perfect, and I'm happy because obviously Warner Bros. Chooses to back him in his next few films by giving him the higher budget to do more stunts and things like this. You know, we'll talk about the chase in the Dark Knight in a couple of days' time, but that's done on miniatures for the scenes that has it. It's also done with real vehicles. So why do CGI? And it's now become, it's the whole film versus digital conversation. I'm not saying this is down to just Nolan. I think he's an integral part of this, that the industry is moving back to doing as much CGI as they can. Sorry, completely wrong words. As much stunts and practical as they can, with doing the CG for what has to be CG. I think that's a really good mandate that they're going back to, because at the end of the day, the year 2000, computers are a new big thing. Of course, everyone wants to try computers, but you know, you get to 2020, yes, you've got stuff like The Lion King, The Mandalorian, which is utilizing tech for the future for budgetary reasons, whatever you want to say, but you cannot deny shooting on location and shooting with miniatures. It's going to make the film last longer. It's going to age better. It's perfect, and I'm happy you got to do that in Begins. Sorry,
yeah, that was going to be my point as well. It just makes it, this film still looks incredible even to this day, and it's just going to age better and better because yeah, because of all the practical in it. Other Nolan-isms I can mention, I think in terms of casting, yes, we have seen some recurring cast members. Actually, we didn't talk about the guy from The Following. I've forgotten his name now.
Yes.
The lead actor, apparently. I did catch him, actually, when I rewatched it. He is one of the Wayne Enterprise, the Wayne, the water, whatever it is. He's like doing something in the water thing in Wayne Enterprises. Doesn't have a line, I don't believe. He's just there in the background, but it's nice to see that recurring character.
I believe he's called like the young, whatever his title role is. So they even tried the whole, because he's called the young man in the Following. So
Is it?
Even his credit is the young something, I don't know, pipeline engineer or something like that. But it was really.
Sorry.
I'd say watching it on Sunday was really funny because never in my life I ever paid attention. And then now I watch, I was like, that guy from The Following. You see his eyes more than anything. It's like, the guy from The Following. Couldn't find the woman from it, though.
No, apparently she's in the restaurant or something. When I'm assuming it's the scene where Bruce Wayne says, "I'm buying this hotel." I'm assuming she's somewhere there. I didn't see her either. But definitely from this movie, you know, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, definitely chief among them. Killian Murphy as well. We are starting to see those, and Ken Watanabe. We are starting to see those more focal characters that are going to come into later, much bigger Christopher Nolan movies after this one. And I think this is one where it really started. Another one that I can mention is the loner kind of introspective lead character, which we had in The Following. We had it in Memento. We've had it in all of the preceding ones up until this point. And Bruce Wayne, I mean, is there a bigger loner character in comic book or film history? So you've kind of made it when you've made this movie. I definitely think we'll see more Nolan-isms when we get to the likes of Dark Knight.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned, that is kind of the main one that everything afterwards is, you know, that's like the linchpin of all of his films, I think. If we're going to go into final thoughts for me, as I mentioned, this is my favorite Batman film out of the trilogy. I love the feel of it, the vibe, just the look, the style, everything. It all started from this one. This is my favorite one that Christian Bale did as Batman. I think he nailed the voice, nailed the persona and everything in it. And fundamentally, I love that it is a Batman film. It is a Bruce Wayne film. It is solely on him pretty much. And I think to some degree that's lost in a few of the other ones. You know, obviously with Dark Knight, you have all of these other characters. You're focusing on Harvey Dent, you're focusing on Gordon, which is fair enough. You have to do that in a movie. But I like that this one knows where it stands and it stays to that goal of being a Batman film. Is there some clunky dialogue in this film? Yes, there is in all of them. The main one that stuck out to me was the water technician at the end. The exposition guy is it's right on top of the main hub and the monorail is going to drive right here and it's going to blow and it's going to destroy the city. It's like, I got it. I understand the premise of the plot. You don't have to keep telling me every 5 minutes. There's some little moments like that. It's fine for what it is. But just for what this did for revitalizing Batman, which at that point was a dead IP, and not just for this trilogy, visually and aesthetically for pretty much all future Batman media. Even to this day, I know that we've had another Batman after this that everyone kind of, well, not everyone, I don't want to speak to everyone, but we're still kind of getting overlooked for Christian Bale's. Even, I mean, we'll talk about the Joker in the next movie. It's all stems from this trilogy. And this is where it all started. This is one that I definitely keep coming back to. I do love this movie and was definitely the right move to revitalize the franchise. And Batman Begins is my favorite of the Dark Knight trilogy.
Batman Begins is a phenomenal film. It's one of the best comic films ever made, without a shadow of a doubt, as is the one that follows.
And non-linear storytelling, we didn't mention that either.
Yes,
that's very big in this movie.
And I think, quickly going as a final thought, it not makes it smarter, but it'd be too boring to have the film start with, here's my parents getting shot, here's me training, Gotham, Batman, final duel. That just is too easy. It's of course it works, you know, it's an origin, but to do that many years, that many iterations, I think is just too much. So what they did, they were adventurous, they tried new things, they had a new design for Gotham, the performances, the cast. Every creative decision in this only improves the final outcome of what's going to come. We know what's coming with the Dark Knight. No one would have known in 2005 that final shot, the whole Joker cards, which is a phenomenal ending, one of my favorite endings to a film.
Watching it,
I was going to say that's an experience that I would have loved. That in 2005, you know, had I been at this age in 2005 watching that, not having a clue what's coming next, not having the film discourse the internet has, but that ending is, you've just watched a masterpiece, and then you get the tease of the Joker, and immediately it's, you know, in this day and age, you know, it would have been spoiled anyway. But the final thoughts on this film, it's incredible. I can't really add much more to it than what Chris has said. Chris has absolutely annihilated anyone else's opinion to sum up the film. All I can say is that the foundations have been laid for not just the Dark Knight, but for the comic book movie genre that in 2020 is the most dominant genre in cinema and has been for 10 I'd say 10, 15 years now. It's really dominated from the get-go, and I think Batman Begins is an instigator in taking it to that next level. It got Oscar nominations, didn't get the wins, but they're coming soon. So that's as much as I can say. Again, this is Christopher Nolan month, so there's a lot of Nolanisms which we've just discussed through. I'm kind of lost for words right now. I cannot believe we have done an hour and 35 minutes on Batman Begins. It is absolutely phenomenal. If you've been with us for the long ride, I don't mean this to turn into the ending, but thank you, because it has been incredible. Obviously, we're not live. We will be reading all your comments on the sidebar, so you get commenting below. Let us know what you think of Batman Begins. Even let us know what you think of the Dark Knight Trilogy, but we are obviously going to review them all individually, so do keep popping in. I'm going to bring up that schedule one more time for you all, because this may be the one where you all pop in. So if you're watching today, Saturday the 8th of August, we'll be with you on this Monday for The Prestige, but we're revisiting The Dark Knight next Thursday the 13th. That's going to be very interesting. Then we have Dark Knight Rises, which is definitely going to be, Chris, how do we say, the liveliest? I think this has been phenomenal, because this is just two people talking about how much they love the film for an hour and 40. Dark Knight Rises, I'm going to be honest, I have no idea how that video is going to go, and it's going to be fantastic because neither of us know. I don't think we'll have arguing, but in our heads we'll be arguing.
It's going to be like, go to your corners, gentlemen. Like, wait for the bell.
Yeah, it's going to be like Battle of the Brackets, but for an hour and a half. But I'm going to leave that here with my polite outro for Batman Begins. Of course, I've had a great time reviewing this, and it's Christopher Nolan month.
Absolutely. You just saw the schedule there, folks, so you know that all the movies that are to come, all the ones that we're looking forward to, your Inception, even Prestige, the next one that we've got coming out on Monday, definitely up there as one of my favorites. So keep it locked here. As he's mentioned, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Pick up a nice Sync Copy t-shirt if you want to. Links in the description down below. But this is just a blast going through all of these movies, and looking forward to talking about them some more. So that'll do it from us. Thank you for sticking with us for this very, very long video. We knew it was going to be long. Didn't quite expect it to go on for this long, but it's awesome. And we'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.